So, for those of you who are not familiar with John Birch Society, Dave's going to give us a little update on, or briefing on them. They've been around for quite some time. I'm probably one of the first to really start digging deep into the Constitution and teaching the Constitution stuff, but I'm going to let Dave digress. I'm going to introduce him. Dave Heim is a retired police dispatcher of nearly 40 years. He is married with 2 grown children. His daughter is a police officer, and his son is what you might call a singing cowboy. Now, we'll let Dave digress, I guess, if someone wants to question him on that. His passions are fishing. I got to tell you, because he said, hey, where can I stop and fish on my way down? He came from Warrenton, Missouri, so I just thought that was cool. You put that in there. Passion is fishing, woodworking, shooting, and reading. He is originally from Wisconsin, so I'm a lifetime Green Bay Packers fan. You knew there might be some rebuttal there. 3 things his father told him that stand out above all the rest. Number 1, the principle is everything. Number 2, the knowledge to be gained from books is virtually unlimited. And number 3, if you depend on someone else to solve your problem for you, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be sorely disappointed. May I welcome our speaker, Dave Heim.
How well can you hear without the microphone?
You need the mic?
You need the mic.
Not? Okay. The gentleman in the back with that shirt on, you know, if you had hair, your facial features resemble Ron Paul.
Ron Paul.
Ron Paul, that's a good thing.
Wow. I've heard Tony Dungy, but I've never.
Let's see. All questions till the end, but I will ask you any number of questions in order to get some participation here, and there are things you need to think about.
Do you want the mic stand?
Oh yeah, if you do have one.
We have one.
I'm missing a page. It's here somewhere. Preparing for this evening was somewhat of a learning experience for me too. Even though I've been through a lot of this before, I learned a lot in it. All of it not good. I'm sure someone is wondering, there it is, somebody's wondering about my son being a singing cowboy, so I may as well address that and be done with it. He works in Yellowstone during the summer and fall as a wrangler. He drives the horse-drawn wagons and those things, and he plays the music for the cookout every night. In the winter, he's at Lone Mountain Ranch in Montana, and he plays music there a few nights a week, and he drives the wagons, takes care of horses and whatnot. So he writes his own music. Out there, he just has to play country western, so it's not a challenge. But he likes doing it anyway. He makes a lot more money playing the music than he does doing the wrangling. But he's doing what he likes. And I told him, if you do something for a living that you like, you'll never work a day in your life. On his off days, he climbs the mountains, takes the trails. He'll go 20, 30 miles in a day and go up 2 or 3 peaks. Okay. Since we're here to talk about Article 5 I think the first order of business is to be sure we have a universal understanding of what Article 5 is. Does anybody know what the purpose of Article 5 is? No? Article 5 defines the ways to amend the U.S. Constitution. If you don't know what it does, then you wouldn't know how many ways there are to amend the Constitution. There are two. I guess the best way is I'll just take it all verbatim. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid for all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. The one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. So it's for amending the Constitution. We have 27 amendments in our Constitution, including the first 10, which are the Bill of Rights. And every one of them have become part of the Constitution by the first method. The convention that we had, and we've only had one, was in 1787, and it's referred to as a runaway convention. The reason for that is it was for the sole purpose, supposed to be for the sole purpose of amending and revising the Articles of Confederation. But that isn't what happened. When the delegates met, they threw out the Articles of Confederation and wrote a whole new constitution, which in this case worked out real well for us. In my opinion, and I doubt that there's anyone here that would disagree, that convention, the men in that convention were of such moral character, knowledge, and wisdom that I don't believe that it could ever be duplicated again. Now, why do we have an effort to make a constitutional convention now? That's come up throughout our history from time to time, groups of one and one. The reason the second mode of amendment was put into the Constitution was it's predictable. Congress is not going to vote for amendments that step on its toes, that limit its power. They like their power. So that was a means to get amendment passed in spite of Congress. What are some of I think we'd all agree, federal government is out of control.
Yes.
True.
No disagreements? What are some of the things Congress does that constitute out of control?
Send money to Ukraine for no reason.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, there's one. We've got bigger ones though, yes.
They do nothing. They're letting the president and giving him all their power.
Yes, they're doing that too, back in the back.
No.
Yes.
Deficit spending, which is destroying our value of our money.
That's true too, and that's touching on a real big one. Any other ideas?
I say everything, except for, protecting us, everything that they do is unbelievable.
Okay.
They don't look at the Constitution first. They just make laws.
They don't care about the Constitution.
Yeah, I was kind of on that, is basically the Constitution is not for us, it's for them. To
As
restrict.
much as they can make it. What about, yes,
They're usurping the states' rights, and they're not allowing each of the states to be their own sovereign state.
they're doing all those things, but one real big one that's real important is spending. We're almost $32 trillion in debt. I took the liberty of looking at the budget This is for 2022. It's the last year that that I found it in a graph form. This budget is $6.3 trillion. I really don't think that the average person can grasp what 6.3 trillion of anything is. It's such a vast number. And out of that 6.3 trillion, 4.1 trillion is classified as mandatory. That includes Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, income security programs. I didn't know we even had such a thing, at least by that name. Student loan programs, and another category called other. Other mandatory spending includes some veterans benefits, federal, civilian, and military retirement benefits, and other mandatory programs, whatever those are. 1.7, by the way, that 4.1 trillion is 65% of the budget. 1.7 trillion is classified as discretionary. Discretionary includes the military, education, HUD, HHS, some of the alphabet agencies. I don't know if that includes, I presume it does include the intelligence agencies as well.
They can be defunded.
Now, the irony of this is 65% of the budget is considered mandatory, but how much of that 4.1 trillion is constitutional?
Probably not a whole lot.
Yeah, basically none of it. Now, this is real general terms. It's not broken down into smaller categories. There might be a little something constitutional in there, but for our purposes, basically none of it. And the 1.7 trillion that's discretionary, about half of it is for the military. And the rest, I don't even know what all, but basically, most of that is unconstitutional as well. It's accurate to say today that 80% of everything the federal government is doing is unconstitutional. Now, if we could, hypothetically, eliminate that 80% of federal spending, that is not authorized in the Constitution, what would that do to the federal government's ability to be out of control? The presumption is if we could eliminate 80% of spending that's unconstitutional, it would also eliminate 80% of the size and the power of the federal government. Now, the point of all this is not the budget per se. The first step in correcting any problem is
Identify
the problem.
what?
Identify the problem.
Correctly identify the problem. Well, does it sound like if 80% of all that spending is already unconstitutional, then how is that a problem with the Constitution?
They come up with a solution to the problem first, create the problem, and then implement the solution.
Well, the Constitution is not the problem at all. All those limitations that these so-called amendments would address are already unconstitutional. So why would we be amending the Constitution for those? If the Constitution is not the problem, then tampering with the Constitution is also not the solution. So that being the case, what is the problem?
Interpretation of the Constitution.
And who does that?
Supreme Court. Federal Court.
Not necessarily. The people in the government are the problem. Now, even if our Constitution was perfect, the results of it would only be as perfect as the people that are implementing it. And that's the problem. So to have a convention to amend the Constitution is wrong-headed. I would give most of the proponents of a convention the benefit of the doubt and presume that they're well-intentioned, though they're not well-informed, and I don't think they've thought through what it is they're proposing here. Now, who is it that's trying to get this convention? The primary group proponent of this convention is called Convention of States, COS for brevity's sake. Believe it or else, probably the bulk of the supporters of that are conservatives. Things like term limits, balanced budget amendment, those appeal to conservatives. But how many of those supporters do you think would still be supporting COS if they knew that they're also on the side of the Communist Party and of George Soros and all the plethora of organizations, all of them leftist or communist, that he funds? Now, I've been to the state capitol on several occasions and given testimony to legislative committees in opposition to an Article 5 convention. And when I have, COS has also been there. When I hear them state their case, there are three things that stand out to me. These are not things they explicitly say, they're more like implied. One is that conservatives will control the convention. Two, only good amendments, good worthwhile amendments will be considered. And three, the federal government won't be involved. If you go to the COS website, there's a lot of interesting things you find. And they make it sound, and they do this in front of legislative committees also, they make it sound like this is a convention of the states, and the federal government has nothing to do with it. Well, if that's the case, why is it that all of COS's efforts and resources to this point in time have been aimed at convincing state legislatures to apply for a convention to Congress?
That's exactly right. I mean, they have to ask Congress to be able to do it.
Yeah. Now, those three things, we'll look at each of those individually. That conservatives would control the convention, these are all patently false. This would be a national convention, and all 50 states will participate, including all the cuckoo for Cocoa Puff states, like California, Illinois, New York, Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, to name but a few. What kind of people do you think those states would choose as delegates to a convention? Maybe more to the point, what kind of amendments would they propose? Would delegates like that exchange their support for someone else's amendment in return for their support for theirs? That's kind of like the beginning of corruption. Only good amendments would be considered. This is a quote. I copied and pasted it right off the COS website. Pardon me. They say, our convention would only allow the states to discuss amendments that limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints, and place term limits on federal officials. As we discussed with the budget, fiscal restraints and power and jurisdiction of the federal government are already unconstitutional. So where are the flaws or errors in the Constitution that a convention is supposed to fix.
There is no.
Exactly, yeah. They're already limited. So that argument does not hold water. And the federal government won't be involved? Well, make no mistake about it, an Article 5 convention is a federal function called by the federal government to amend the federal Constitution. They're in it with both feet. This is a page from a report by the Congressional Research Service in 2012. Between 1973 and 1992, 22 bills and resolutions to enact congressional procedures that would be implemented in response to a successful call for an Article 5 convention were introduced in the House, while 17 were introduced in the Senate. The federal government will be involved. Now, COS alleges that they can limit a convention, unlike the original. They can be limited whether it's to a single subject or just to proposing amendments. They say they can. And history says they can't. I don't want to go over that yet. Some of the there are professional opinions, both by the founding fathers as well as law professors and many others, on whether or not a convention can be limited. And the founding fathers made no bones about the fact that at the convention they oversaw their instructions and went way beyond that. And it's a good thing they did for us. In Federalist number 40, James Madison invoked the transcendent and precious right to abolish one government and set up a new one as justification for the delegates ignoring their instructions. You know, the COS now is alleging that the original convention was not a runaway, but what they actually did was amend the Articles of Confederation and then change the name of it from that to the U.S. Constitution. Everybody else says that's not so. Patrick Henry said the Federal Convention ought to have amended the old system. For this purpose, they were solely delegated. The object of their mission extended to no other considerations. Robert Whitehall, can it then be said that the late convention did not assume powers to which they had no legal title? On the contrary, sir, it is clear that they set aside the laws under which they were appointed and under which alone they could derive any legitimate power or legitimate authority. They arrogantly exercised any powers that they found convenient to their object, and in the end, they have overthrown that government which they were called upon to amend in order to introduce one of their own fabrication. John Lansing from New York, the power of the convention was restrained to amendments of a federal nature. The acts of Congress, the tenor of the acts of the states, the commissions produced by the several deputations all prove this. It was unnecessary and improper to go further. Well, what it was is the participants in the convention believed that the needs of the country outweighed the need to abide by those limitations. And the reason that they were able to ignore those limitations is found in the fact that the delegates were not representatives of their state. They were representatives of the people. And all power in the government emanates from the people. Therefore, the people are above the Congress or their state legislatures to do what they thought best. This is a summary of state court decisions since that time. The members of a constitutional convention are the direct representatives of the people, and as such they may exercise all sovereign powers that are vested in the people of the state. They derive their powers not from the legislature, but from the people, and hence their power may not in any respect be limited or restrained by the legislature. That Congressional Research Service report pointing out all the various resolutions that were made when they were anticipating a convention. The problem with that is there's no guarantee that the delegates would obey those either. It may interest you to know, this is another quote from the COS website. They were asked the question, is it safe? Meaning, is a convention safe? Their response is absolutely. Article 5 includes numerous safeguards that protect the U.S. Constitution and ensure that only widely approved amendments are adopted. The strongest safeguard, any amendment proposed by the convention goes through the exact same ratification process as amendments proposed by Congress. It must be approved by 38 states. Well, we read Article 5, and other than that 38 state ratification requirement, I didn't see any safeguards in there. There was not a word about it.
Article 5 is too vague.
It is. It doesn't address most of the questions that come up from it. But as for that 38 requirement, that was enforced at the passage of the 16th and 17th Amendments. And it didn't stop those. 16th, if you're not aware, is the income tax. 17th made senators elected by popular vote rather than appointed by their state legislatures. And make no mistake about it, those two amendments are absolutely foundational for the exponential growth of the federal government. Between the Federal Reserve Act and the income tax, it has given the federal government access to what you could say is nearly unlimited revenue. Remember the budget? And the 17th Amendment, the senators were appointed by their state legislatures in order that they would represent the interests of the states. By changing that to popular vote, the states have no one in the Congress that's really watching out for states' rights. And also it's made senators from what they were to the same kind of pandering prostitutes that most representatives are. So those things are critical in what we have now in the government rather than what we had prior to those. You may be interested to know, well, before I move to that, let me point out a couple of things. There's an increasing amount of chicanery coming from COS these days. Here's an article, well, where did that page go? This is an article by the Convention of States, right here. And the title of it is, an Article 5 convention is not a constitutional convention. And they tell that to state legislatures when they're making their case to try and convince them to call for an article convention. Now, Black's Law Dictionary, which was first published in 1891 and is to this day the most widely referenced law dictionary to be found anywhere. Too much paper. It defines a constitutional convention as a duly convened convention of the people of a state or nation for the purpose of amending, revising, or drafting a constitution. Well, now that certainly covers the definition of the original convention in 1787, but it also provides the definition, the genuine definition of what is being proposed by COS. Here it is: a duly constituted assembly of delegates or representatives of the people of a state or nation for the purpose of framing, revising, or amending its constitution. So that argument on COS's part doesn't really hold water, and it really doesn't make any difference what you want to call it. They are talking about an Article 5 convention, and we are talking about an Article 5 convention. Now, you would be interested to know that there are already 6 that we know of alternative constitutions already written and waiting in the wings to be proposed in the event that they get a convention. The fact that these are already written, does that not suggest that perhaps the proponents of a convention intend to try to make a convention, if they get one, into a runaway? Otherwise, why would they have a constitution already written instead of amendments? And the most odious parts of these constitutions, could they not just as easily be proposed as amendments? When we get into those, you're going to be shocked. These constitutions, there is the Constitution for the New States of America, written by Rexford Tugwell, published in 1974 in the book The Emerging Constitution. There is the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, which is published by the Revolutionary Communist Party. There is a new Constitution for the United States, also known as the Democracy Constitution. And what system of government do we have?
A republic.
You betcha. And we have,
Keep it.
Yes.
yeah. And we have the Libertarian Constitution, which is published on the website of the National Constitution Center, the NCC. And the Progressive Constitution, also published on the NCC website. One other one is the Conservative Constitution, which is the Constitution, the Conservative is for the NCC's Constitution drafting project. Now, the one by Tugwell, there's no point in spending any time on that. It would eliminate the states, and it would divide the country into 10 regions, every one of which would be completely subservient to the federal government. Now, the Constitution by the Communist Party is exactly what you would expect. It's premised on the idea that society has collapsed, our government is gone, and communists have taken over. So it's communism, plain and simple.
Kind of what we have now.
Yeah. Well, they're still putting up a facade now
Right,
in order to try and dupe us until they can complete their mission.
yes.
So we don't need to spend a lot of time on that one. That leaves the libertarian, the democracy, the progressive, and the conservative. The libertarian constitution is close to a carbon copy of what we already have, as you'll find anywhere. So we don't really need to spend much time on that either. There are a couple little tweaks in it that could be useful, but other than that, it's almost word for word our Constitution. So, we'll start with the Progressive Constitution. And the reason I'm going through these is not only did I think it would be instructive to see what it is they have in mind, but also so we fully understand what's at stake in the event that they get a convention. In the Progressive Constitution, representatives serve 4-year terms. It doesn't say how many. To be a representative, you would only have to be 18 years old. I don't think that's a good idea. There would be 1 senator per state and an additional senator for every 1/100th of the national population in the state. So I kind of crunched the numbers on that a bit. California would come up with 11 senators, and 32 states would only have 1.
Imagine that,
Yeah.
dirtbag.
So there would be no chamber of Congress that would in which the states would have equal representation. The preponderance of political power would be to the more populous states, the ones with the most big cities. And who controls most of those cities? You got the idea. The states would control the means.
The only thing that can't be changed though is, equal representation in the Senate. That's the only thing that cannot be changed.
You can't undo this.
Real quick, okay? The only time we ever had an Article 5 constitutional convention, we threw out the Articles of Confederation and we have the new Constitution. The next time it happens, they throw everything out again, and one of these constitutions he's reading up there are gonna be the one.
Maybe, but under this Constitution, that would not be the case. There would be nobody to represent with equal representation the interests of the states. That's one of the big problems. States control the means of elections, but Congress can change them. The president would not be required to be a natural-born citizen anymore, only a citizen. Yeah, they're trying to throw that by the wayside now, it looks like. This Constitution is predicated on the belief that rights come from the state. I can't emphasize how critical that is. That'll become clear shortly, okay? Second Amendment would be gutted. As a matter of fact, I have that here. It simply states, the right of the people to keep and bear arms is subject to reasonable regulation by the United States and by the states. So there is no longer would not be any longer an inalienable right to that. There would be no electoral college, 18-year terms for judges, and the president would be elected by national popular vote using ranked choice voting. And Article 5 convention, when 2/3 of the states or states representing 2/3 of the population, then they could bring about a convention based on population.
the
Once
ranked
again-
choice is already coming into some of the states.
What's that?
The ranked choice is already coming into some of the
Yeah.
states.
And
It
it's
is.
being pushed here in Missouri.
Yeah, it needs to be adamantly opposed. So once again, the most populous states would hold the preponderance of political power, and abortion would be constitutional. That's not correcting any flaws, that's legalizing the abuses. Okay, the democracy Constitution. Let's see, democracy. Like the other one, like the progressive, it's predicated on the belief that rights come from the state, not from God. It legalizes discrimination. I was floored when I saw this. And I'll give it to you verbatim. No person shall be subjected to unjust discrimination on account of race, color, religion, blah, 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 sex, sexual orientation, or gender. Reasonable governmental measures designed to protect or advance groups disadvantaged by past discrimination are permitted. So there we have EEOC on steroids. And that rights coming from the state, we're gonna go into that in a lot more depth shortly. Let's see. Legalized Christian. Anyone over 18 years old, this is the democracy Constitution, anyone over 18 years old would get a guaranteed minimum annual income of no less than 1/4 of the compensation of the members of Congress. Based on what congressmen make now, I crunched the numbers and that would amount to like $43,800 per person. First of all, what makes you think you're gonna be able to pay for that? But second of all, it sounds like a huge incentive not to work.
Universal basic
Just think how many people with something like that would become completely dependent on the government. If they can learn to live within their means that they get from, why would they work?
We're there now. We
And
can
there's-
get employees to work for $80,000 a year.
Well, California, I think, is trying to establish a minimum annual income, but it's nowhere near that much. There would be a wealth tax. Anyone earning 200 times the compensation of a member of Congress would have to pay a minimum of 2% of their income for a wealth tax. And it doesn't say it ends at 2, it just says minimum of 2. There's no telling how high that could go and who decides who pays what. Oh, this is precious. Council of Indigenous Nations would become a chamber of Congress. So there'd be 3 chambers in the Congress, and one of them wouldn't have any interest whatsoever in what's good for the rest of the country. Representatives would serve 4-year terms. It doesn't say how many. There would be 1 senator per state and additional senators based on the population of 5 million. Every 5 million people, you'd get another senator. So once again, there is no chamber of Congress in which the states have equal representation. Based on population, there's that power in favor of the big cities and the states in which they are. All bills would originate in the House. The House confirms court appointments by 60%, and Congress can make federal elections mandatory. That sounds odd, but where have you ever seen that before? Totalitarian countries where the elections, everyone knows they're a complete farce. So nobody goes to vote. By making it mandatory, it gives the optics of all this interest in election on the part of the people. It's purely for optics, but everyone knows the way it's gonna go. This is dictator stuff. The president and the Congress would be elected by ranked choice voting. The president must have served at least 4 years in elected office before being eligible to run. There would be a national election commission to control federal elections. A national election commission controlled by more likely the executive branch.
Or
But-
George Soros.
Something like that, yeah. There's no mention of a Second Amendment or firearms in this Constitution. How that would play out, you can only guess. Ratification of this Constitution would be by popular vote requiring 60%. And then, the conservative Constitution. Now this one may not be the worst, but to me it's the most disturbing. And you'll know why momentarily. Before I get into that, I want to read you this bio on a man named Robert George. This is real significant. Robert George is McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. He has served as Chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and before that on the President's Council on Bioethics, and as a presidential appointee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He also served as a U.S. member of UNESCO's World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, former judicial fellow at the Supreme Court, where he received the Justice Tom C. Clark Award, a graduate of Swarthmore. He holds a JD and MTS degrees from Harvard, and the degrees DPhil, BCL, DCL, and DLit from Oxford. I don't have any idea what even any of those are. And he has been a visiting professor at Harvard Law School.
Oxford's just as bad.
And he is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Is there anyone here that isn't familiar with the CFR? You all are? Suffice it to say, it is the backbone of the deep state and the globalist agenda to destroy our independence and our sovereignty in this country. There is one other thing that he is too. He is on the legal advisory board of COS. Now, as far as what's in this Constitution, 3-year terms for the House, and again, it doesn't say how many. 1 9-year term for senators. Senators would go back to being chosen by their state legislatures. So that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. 1 senator per state, period. And it's hard to say what the effect of that would be, if any. It'd be better or worse. 3/5 of the governors can repeal any bill passed by Congress, or governors representing 3/5 of the population. It makes the central bank constitutional, and it insulates it. I'll give it to you in word for word. Congress shall have the power to create a central bank with the authority to issue currency and make it legal tender for debts, public and private, and to protect the independence of the governors and directors of such bank by reasonable limitations on the president's power to remove them from office. So not only does it make it constitutional, it makes it, they'd be entrenched like a tick on a hound dog. And that part is already part of our Constitution. Let's see. The Second Amendment in this Constitution is gutted. It's there. Neither the states nor the United States shall make or enforce any law infringing on the right to keep and bear arms of the sort ordinarily used for self-defense or recreational purposes, as determined by the federal government, of course, provided that states and the United States may enact and enforce reasonable regulations on the bearing of arms and the keeping of arms by persons determined with due process to be dangerous to themselves or others. So it makes red flag laws constitutional.
Just like they are in Missouri already.
Yeah, well, a number of states, but this would make it constitutional, which it isn't now. Let's see. There's no electoral college. Presidential candidates would be chosen by Congress and elected using ranked choice voting. No electoral college. 2/3 approval for Congress and those things that they require supermajority would be reduced to 3/5. Congress would no longer be able to limit the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Now that one is very seldom used, but it is a legitimate power of the Constitution, or of the Congress. Ratification of this Constitution, the requirement for it would be reduced from 3/4 to 2/3. You remember where COS said that 3/4 ratification requirement is the greatest safeguard they have against bad amendments becoming the law? That's one occurrence. I probably didn't mention, in the 1787 convention, the Articles of Confederation required unanimous consent from all the states in order to amend. But the Constitution that they drafted only required 3/4. Now, I'm not complaining, mind you, under the circumstances, but how could you take a provision of a Constitution that's not yet ratified and apply that to the convention that ratifies it? And there isn't anything based on precedent that would stop them from doing that now. So that 3/4 ratification requirement could be right out the window. Let's see. That's the big things. Now, Robert P. George, COS on the Legal Advisory Board. And this is the part where the rubber really meets the road. I must have passed this up. Oh yeah, there it is. President can serve one 6-year term. I said presidential candidates chosen by Congress and elected using ranked choice voting. Congress may regulate the production and sale of goods and services in national markets. Here it is word for word. Congress shall have the power to regulate and promote commerce with foreign nations and among several states and with the national tribes, and to regulate the production and sale of goods and services in national markets. What does that even mean? Does that mean that Congress can regulate the production and sale of firearms out of existence? You could certainly bet that would be one of the objects of it. But the more I looked at that, the more I thought, that's a recipe for the government to take over lock, stock, and barrel of the entire economy, goods and services. Does that mean that they could take control by regulating of the healthcare field, all the doctors, all the people that work in there? Those are services, or communications, or transportation, or How about the social media things, which a lot of those are pretty worthless right now, but they'd be included in that. Now, where it says, it doesn't say, I say. These are all predicated on the belief that rights come from the state. Here's an example. All persons have the inalienable right to the free exercise of religion in accordance with conscience. You read down a couple of sentences and it says, except where necessary to secure public peace and order or comparably compelling ends. Do you see the fatal flaw there? Compare that to our First Amendment. What are the first 5 words? Congress shall make no law. No exceptions. When it says all persons shall have, that's an assumption that the government is giving it to you. And then it turns around and shows you where it can negate or take that right away altogether. So even using the word inalienable in any of this is an absolute mockery. There's only one way inalienable rights have ever existed, not only in the world, but in all of world history, and that's here. Why do we have them and nobody else does? What's our Constitution predicated on?
The Bible.
I'm sorry?
The Bible.
God.
You're on the right track.
Common law.
No,
Nature.
it's predicated on the fact that our rights come from God. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with a capital C.
That's where common law.
True enough, but that is specifically the source of our rights. And because God is a power higher than the state has no legal authority to infringe on or take away those rights. This turns that on its head. When I saw that, the first thing that came to mind is I've seen that before. And indeed, that's the case. That's not the page oh, here it is. This is a page from the 1936 Constitution of the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. Article 103. In all courts, cases are tried with the participation of people's assessors, in other words, juries, except in cases specially provided for by law. And Article 111, in all courts of the USSR, cases are heard in public unless otherwise provided for by law. It gets better. This is a copy of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989. How about Article 14? Will do as well as any. States parties shall respect the right of the child to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And you go down the second paragraph down, freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary for blah, blah, blah. Basically, the greater good. Anytime you see the greater good in anything, run the other way. Or, let's see. 15. States parties recognize the rights of the child to freedom of association and to freedom of peaceful assembly. Right after that very next sentence. No restrictions may be placed on the exercise of these rights other than those imposed in conformity with the law and which are necessary. Says who? And this document is not unique to the UN. You can look at any UN convention treaty document that deals with rights. And you'll find that exact same word for word legal mechanism to obliterate whatever rights. Under those circumstances, they're not rights at all, they're privileges. The government says you may, but then turns around and says, no, you may not. This is what happens when government attains unlimited power. Because the power to grant and deny rights is most literally the right to life and death. Any part of that could be done. Now, the people that wrote these constitutions, does it suggest to you, because these constitutions are already written and there hasn't been a convention, does it suggest that maybe the intention of these groups is to make sure that a convention is a runaway? Otherwise, why would they need those constitutions? And how did I want to put that? Is it possible? What if the amendments don't matter? Amendments are only the impetus for getting the convention, and they don't care about the amendments. Their objective is not the amendments, it's the convention. Our enemies are familiar with all this history, and they see a convention as a means to get rid of our Constitution once and for all and overturn our system of government in one fell swoop. Now, this man, Robert George, you heard his credentials, and you would have to say, by establishment standards, they're impressive. But are we to believe that he and Mark Meckler, the president of COS, are not aware of what this really means to us? The fact that they call it a conservative constitution is just more deception on their part. This is in, the Communist Party's constitution, the one they've written that there was no point in talking about. In there, it says, freedom of speech, of assembly and association, and of dissent and protest shall not be restricted except in cases of violation of the law and through due process. What's the difference between this and these others? With these constitutions, they're not even pretending to rein in the federal government. These are designed to unleash it. And I don't believe for a second that COS and Mark Meckler don't know it. He's doing okay, by the way. He's the president and CEO. His wife is the vice president. Between the two of them, the last figures I saw, they're pulling down $609,000 a year. And the budget through donations of COS is in the millions, 5, 6 or more, 8 million. There's one thing in the libertarian constitution that I thought I would read because it's kind of funny. It's the 10th Amendment. The powers not expressly delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And we mean it. It actually says that there. I love that. Now, what's the time?
Keep talking.
Since I'm retired, usually I don't care what time it is, so I don't wear a watch.
Jan will let you know, don't worry about it.
Just,
12 minutes.
as a matter of coincidence, I got this email yesterday. There's video goes with it, but I can't do anything with that. It's from the John Birch Society. The Pro-Constitutional Convention Group, Convention of States, has so far lost every fight this year in numerous state legislatures. As a result, it has begun ratcheting up its attacks on the John Birch Society and stooping lower to do so. JBS members have served as the tip of the spear in the fight to preserve the U.S. Constitution and stop a con-con. They have become COS's worst nightmare.
That's good.
And I like to think I'm doing my part to help.
Thank you.
Now, I don't know, how familiar is everyone with the John Birch Society?
Very.
Their website is jbs.org, and on that, you can sign up for legislative alerts in your email that'll be sent to you automatically when there are pieces of legislation pending before Congress that you need to know about. You can find them from there. This is an article from the Berkeley Daily Gazette by Mike Colbert in 1973. And it says, whatever else, call him correct. Robert Welch was the founder of the Birch Society in 1958. And in that opening meeting, the founding meeting of the society, Robert Welch made 10 predictions, which he has here. He looked at those since then. One is greatly expanded government spending for missiles, for so-called defense generally, for foreign aid, for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible. Two, higher and much higher taxes. Three, an increasingly unbalanced budget despite the higher taxes. Boy, do you ever call that one right. Four, wild inflation of our currency leading rapidly toward its ultimate repudiation. Five, government controls of prices, wages, and materials supposedly to combat inflation. Actual direct price controls we saw in 1973 under Richard Nixon. They have other ways that are more subtle of controlling things like that. Number six, greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives. This is to be accomplished naturally and automatically by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government. Seven, far more concentration of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. Eight, the steady stream of federal aid and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education.
Written in what year?
73. The quotes come from 1958.
Okay.
9, a constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare, the beauties and the absolute necessity of peace. Peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government, which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself into a Kremlin-ruled tyranny. I would say it'd be more likely a Beijing rule at this point, but the end result is the same. I've got, let's see, 2 boxes full of old, call them magazines, they're more like booklets, written by Robert Welch. It's the precursor to the New American. It was called American Opinion. And the benefit of those, just like the benefit of reading old books, is you can see what they have to say, and now you know whether they came true. How prescient were they? And these things by Robert Welch, the man was a genius, and I regret that he died some years before the John Birch Society found me. But he died in 85. Well, let's see. I'll tell you firsthand, there is no greater defender of the Constitution than the John Birch Society.
I believe that.
And I'll tell you, the New American and this issue, which is entirely about an Article 5 convention, is on the table back there. No other magazine anywhere does what this magazine does. They're the most reliable and informative source of information you can find anywhere. Their philosophy is they've been assumed to be crazies right from the beginning, conspiracy theorists. But Robert Welch, if nothing else, was an absolute student of history, and he read and read and read, and he saw between the lines of what was going on. One of the things that I noticed in COS is they don't seem to recognize, or maybe they don't want to recognize, the idea that what's being done to our country is not a naturally occurring sequence of events. It's been planned and executed for over 100 years. It's generational. Where was I? Oh, yeah, the COS, they don't recognize it, or they don't want to recognize it. I've come to believe in preparing for this tonight that COS doesn't want to rein in the federal government at all.
They want to get
I believe they're part of the enemy.
entire state. They
I'm
want to
sorry?
get rid of everything. They want to get rid of our
Yeah.
borders between states. They want to get rid of everything.
They support the deep state as much as
Yeah.
the deep staters. And they're making plenty of money in the meantime. We can take questions. As far as the John Birch Society goes, there's a book back there by Art Thompson, who is, too, fairly recently was the CEO of the society. The book is about private property rights, and you'll be absolutely fascinated. You can read it in 4 hours or so. It's only a little over 100 pages, but it's excellent. Other books that I would recommend, first and foremost, is The Law. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah.
The Law. It's only 75 pages. You can read it in an hour. It was written in 1850 by Frederick Bastiat, a Frenchman. And to this day, it is the most concise, easy to understand explanation of why things are the way they are and what the proper role of government is that you will find anywhere. Take questions.
So I read about that first convention. To me, it was a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation with the senator. Because wouldn't he, if the Congress were bad, well, they would vote in a bad senator. So wouldn't it have been better for the people to vote, like they made it, where the people voted for the senator, rather than the Congress voting in the Senate? I understand the other side, but if you're corrupt, you're corrupt, and you're going to continue. If the people have a choice, maybe they're not,
Right now, all of this comes down to us. If we allow and we accept corruption, that's what we're going to get. Do you know that the public's approval of Congress, last time I checked, it was between 16 and 30%, but I've seen it as low as single digits. Yet the re-election rate of incumbents is consistently over 90%. How can that be?
It's rigged.
It's laziness.
The elections is rigged.
And it's laziness.
How many of you do your homework before you vote? How many of you know? Do you know who your representative is?
Mm-hmm.
Who is he?
Jason Smith.
That's right. How does he vote? How many
Not good.
have looked at what he does rather than what he says? That's what most people do. It's the best explanation for, well, my guys are good, but the rest of them are crap.
No, you
And
look
we
at their
should-
voting record and then you decide.
And look at the fact that Pfizer spends a lot of money on it, that tells you a lot.
Right.
I think somebody said the right thing, it's rigged already. We can't
Let's see.
get the people in we need, and if we do send them up there, like to Missouri, to Jeff City, you know what happens, the people that are above take over, and they can't have a say.
Or else they're bought.
Somewhere mixed up in this stuff, if I can find it, are some useful tools. There. One of the things the John Birch Society does, and is perhaps the most effective, is they let people see their representatives' voting records. They used to be called trim bulletins some years ago. Now, Tom Foley, you remember who he was? From Washington? He was the sitting Speaker of the House. They flooded his district with these trim bulletins showing his voting record, which was about the equivalent of Pelosi or someone like that. He was a socialist, and they voted him out. If you inform the public, give them the truth, we believe they will make the right decisions. And when you put it in terms of what it's gonna cost them, they frame the issues that are on this bulletin in terms of a plus for voting with the Constitution or an X for voting contrary to the Constitution. And it shows how much that costs the taxpayers. And people see, he voted to cost me all this money, and it's the colossal, and I mean colossal ignorance on the part of the public of the Constitution that allows all this. If you don't understand the foundations that make your own freedom possible, how can you possibly rationally, logically defend them? And they know it. They're counting on our ignorance. And the reason that we have the ignorance to the degree that we do is because we let the federal government get control of education. And it's only gotten worse and worse. And as long as they control education, that's gonna be a tough genie to get back in the bottle.
So what about the control of the elections itself? You know, because we have no control of the elections. Maybe we do here in Cary, but we don't have anything to do with St. Louis or Kansas City or San Francisco or all the elections combined, you know, and that's where the problem's at.
You remember when Christopher Bond was in the Senate? I mean, he was a pretty lousy senator. As governor, he was a drunk. He was a drunk as a senator too. However, one time in the mail, I got a fundraising letter from Bond's local office. And it infuriated me so much that I wrote a 2 or 3 page letter to him, and I sent it to his Washington office in order to be sure that he would get it. Because it can literally be the definition of tyranny to steal money from who rightly owns it and then use it for things that they find reprehensible. And that's what I found. I sent him that letter, and I was getting ready for work one day, working afternoons. And about 10 minutes to 2 in the afternoon, I get a phone call. And it's Bond's Washington office, one of the staffers trying to smooth me over. One letter, handwritten. These people, they love their power, and it's the cushiest job they've ever had. They pay attention when you make your feelings known. write them, email them, call them on the phone. Pay attention to those things. That's the means that we have to influence them to do what's right. There was another representative from Kansas, Glickman, Dan Glickman. He was considered a safe seat in the House. And the election came up and they distributed something like 50,000 or more trim bulletins in his district, and they voted him out of office. Anytime they have town hall meetings where they're appearing in person, those are wonderful places to take these and just give them to people as they're coming in. There's no cost, and most of them will be shocked because they don't have a clue how he votes. I know that my representative was Lutkemeyer. He's not the worst, but his voting record is in the neighborhood of 60% constitutional, and that's no answer. That's not good enough. Ann Wagner, she's in the same, she votes about the same as your guy, Smith, Brian Smith, and I can't seem to find. Jason Smith, yeah.
Does JBS keep a scorecard?
Yes, they do. Matter of fact, well, here. Got something that's a little more complete than, this is in the New American Magazine twice a year. This gives you how, on 10 key issues, how every member of the House and the Senate voted, and gives them a percentage score based on strict constitutionality. And if you look through here in the House, well, let me just look at, how about Illinois? It doesn't have too many. Here's a 10%, 10%, 80%, 67, 10, 10, 10, 11, 10, 0, 10, no, after the 0 is 100. 10%, 10%, 80, 67, 10, 10, 10, 11, 10, 0, 10, 0. Yeah, that's still in Illinois. 10, 0, 10, 78, 44, 0, 90, 38, 0, 70. How many people do you think that are constituents of these representatives have any idea about that? It tells you what those 10 issues are, what constitutes a plus or a minus, and why it is or isn't constitutional. And it tells you, well, let's see, it has here, the average House score for this index is 38%, 71% for Republicans, and 7% for the Democrats.
Wow.
They have no idea that. The average score in the Senate is 31, 60% for Republicans and 2 for Democrats. You don't see California. Most of them are zeros.
Do you have the scorecard for Missouri, Dave? Is that in your book? And
Yeah.
is it current?
Let's see. Missouri.
Is Mike Moon on there? He should be close to
Smith.
100.
Jason Smith
Oh,
got
we're
a
doing
70%. His lifetime score, cumulative score, is 78.
What? Not
I
that high.
can't believe
I
that.
can't believe it's that high.
Jason Smith.
Well,
But he does a lot of protective voting as well.
well, this is the actual
Yes.
votes.
Make a good vote.
And they can't deny these. It gives the roll call vote and the date that it was taken. It's part of the congressional record. Mine used to be Lutkemeyer, but because of redistricting after the last census, I'm now in Ann Wagner's district. Lutkemeyer got a 70 in this one, and Ann Wagner got a 60. We need more than 60.
And Wagner's in bed with the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. California is just abhorrent. Let's see, I figured out last year that California, 46% of the congressmen of California got zeros. Is it any wonder that we're in the problem, in the shape that we're in, and that we have the national debt that we have? California, let's see. 70, 10, 10, 90, 10, 10, 0, 60, 10, 0, 10, 0, 10, 10, 10, 0, 10, 10, 10, 0, 60, 70, 78, 10, 50, 0, 10, 10, 10, 10, 0, 10, 10. You get the idea. And these come out twice a year, and this is one of a number of different resources. This one's from the Birch Society, others are from other people, other groups, that give you an idea what they're really doing. And it explains what that issue is. And, oh, let's see, I told you about that and that. I wish I had that one here. In the one that I have, the bulletin on Jason Smith, he got a 67. In those, there are 6 issues. He scored correctly on 4 of them. Same as Ann Wagner. But the one for Ann Wagner that I had is not the same one. It's a different Congress than the one he's in. But these are available. And now, as of this year, those scorecards are available for state representatives as well. Because we're gonna have to depend on the states to exercise their rightful rights.
The 10th Amendment says we should be there already.
Yeah, they're, the proper and constitutional way to deal with all the unconstitutional things of the federal government is nullification.
Yeah.
There's an article and some trifolds back there about that. And COS people like that say that can't work. Well, how many states have legalized marijuana?
Missouri did it, but we didn't want it. You know, there was so.
Well, that's beside the point, but how many?
30,000 words for that.
Yeah, how many states have legalized it, in spite of the fact that it's still illegal at the federal level?
It's 30-something.
There you go. And what's the federal government done about it? Nothing. There's anything they can do. If the states nullify, and they've done this on some firearms bills too, gun control bills, that the state will not enforce it. They will not assist any federal agencies in enforcing these. And if any federal agency comes into our state to attempt to enforce these unconstitutional laws, we will arrest them. That's the way to deal with them. And make no bones about it. Now you gotta have a governor with some cronies, like DeSantis, Abbott, taking these, there have been other issues that have nullified as well, but it needs to be a lot more. With so much of what the federal government doing that's unconstitutional, the state could spend its entire session just nullifying. Just like at the federal level, as far as I'm concerned, the next 3 or 4 Congresses should do nothing but repeal laws that never should have been in the first place.
You guys, let's give our speaker a very big round of applause.